What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, I'm talking about some of my biggest record collecting regrets. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. Record collecting can definitely be an interesting journey sometimes. I passed on lots of albums over the years, not knowing how limited they were going to be or realizing how fast they were going to sell out. I've missed out on really limited pre-orders. I've even thought I've gotten a really good deal on a used album just to have it reissued just a week later. And of course, I've had albums that were hyped up when they were first released just to buy them and find out that they were terrible albums. So today I'm going over some of my biggest vinyl collecting regrets. So I think the biggest and most expensive regret I've had was when the Ozzy Osbourne See You on the Other Side box set first came out in 2019. I initially passed on it because I grew up a big Ozzy fan, I grew up a big Black Sabbath fan, but initially I didn't need to have all of his solo albums. So when they first announced the box set, it was going to be, I think it was like $500 plus shipping, and my initial thought was, well, if they're doing this box set, they're going to eventually do all these albums individually also. Because why wouldn't you? You know, you're going to do this big box set. Maybe you wouldn't do all those albums, but at least you do a good chunk of those albums individually also. And I didn't really need to have all those live albums. There was at least probably 4 or 5 albums I absolutely wanted to have out of that box set. But I didn't think I really needed to drop down, $500 or $600 plus to get that box set. And I think it was even a couple months after it was released, I hopped on Ozzy's website, and surprisingly enough, it was still available. There were still copies available on there. And even at that time, I thought to myself, man, I should probably grab a copy before this sells out. I ultimately decided to pass on it and regretted it there for a while. And then in 2021, they reissued No More Tears. And I thought at that time, hey, they're finally going to start, rolling out some of these reissues. And they did No More Tears, and then that was kind of the end of it. So it was around that time I looked on Discogs, and I want to say, it was going for around, I think, $1,200 or $1,300 on Discogs. I didn't find it for a deal on, I think it was on eBay that I found it for about double what it was initially going for, which I know a lot of people out there will say it's a lot, but I would say within weeks of getting that box set, I went on Discogs, and at that time it was going for, double what I paid for it. So, it's definitely jumped in price since I bought it. I'm glad I bought that box set when I did, but I definitely wish I would have bought it when it first came out. An album I bought that I thought I was getting a good deal on was a few years ago. I bought a copy of American 4 by Johnny Cash. And around the time I bought it, it was going for a little over $100. And I want to say I paid like 70 or $75 for it, which was a lot, but it was a good deal compared for what it was going for. It's an album I've been looking for literally years. I think the last time it had been pressed was 2014, I think. And then I think there was a reissue of it in 2016. But both those presses were going for quite a bit. So I was pretty happy when I tracked down this copy, especially, like I said, it was going for less than what I've been seeing it go for. So I bought that copy as soon as I saw it on Discogs. And then literally like a week later, the announcement came out that it was getting reissued. But part of the fun of record collecting is the hunt. And that's always the risk, or one of the risks involved with it, is when you do find one of those grails out there, one of those albums you've been looking for years, and you finally find a copy of it, you always run the risk of it possibly being reissued the very next week. An album I actually missed out on a couple of times is I've been a big Blink-182 fan for a very long time. And in 2020, they reissued the Dogs Eating Dogs EP. There wasn't any kind of announcement that this EP was going to be getting reissued. The pre-sale just went up on their website. At least I never saw anything about it. And I was working midnights at the time. I happened to wake up in the morning and hop on my phone and saw that the pre-orders had just gone up within the last hour, and they almost immediately sold out. They did 3 different variants of it. There was 1,000 copies of 2 of the variants, and then one variant was, I think there was 500 copies of. So, I mean, first off, an album like that from a band like that, they should never press 2,500 copies of anything. So my immediate reaction was go on eBay, and of course they were already going for, well over $100 on eBay. I actually did have an opportunity to pick one up a couple of months after it came out for, I want to say right around $100 or $105. And I really heavily considered grabbing a copy of it, but I think mainly out of principle, I decided not to get it. But of course, I passed on it, and now it's, well over $300. I think the last one I saw sell on Discogs was like $500, which is way out of my price range. So unless the band officially reissues that album, that'll be the one thing from Blink-182 that I just won't have in my collection. There's been a number of albums that I bought mainly off of hype, and have been very disappointed by. Latest Black Puma's album, Chronicles of a Diamond, I love their first album. It's one of my favorite albums of the last several years, and Chronicles of a Diamond is not a bad album, don't get me wrong. I think comparing it to their debut album, it just doesn't compare for me. And honestly, it's one of those albums where, the next time I put a group of albums together to sell at my local record store, it'll probably be in that batch. I think they're one of those bands that, kind of a victim of their debut album, where the pressure they had from that debut album, they were just never going to be able to recapture what they did on that album. And they got a little too experimental and just, I don't know, I think they kind of veered too far away from what they did on that first album. And don't get me wrong, I didn't want them to copy what they did on that first album. It just, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. I guess it's the same thing with the latest Goldfinger album, Never Look Back, that came out a few years ago. When they released the Knife, I think it was that 2017 or 2018, incredible album. But their latest album, it was hard for me to make it all the way through it. And that's coming from someone who is a Goldfinger fan and has been for a very long time. And I don't know if it's gotten to the point where John Feldman is a better producer than he is a band leader, or if maybe this whole supergroup model that he's doing for Goldfinger just isn't working at this point. Whatever he did with the Knife worked, and Never Look Back, it just wasn't a good album. One band that I bought into all the hype for was Måneskin. When their album Rush came out, I bought it on release day, and while the album was okay, I think maybe what hurt the album for me was all the hype around it. Made this album seem like it was going to be this great thing, and it was just kind of okay for me. And I don't think it was just me. It was a lot of people out there. There was a lot of really mixed reviews for this album. And it seemed like all this momentum that Måneskin had before this album came out, they've kind of lost it afterwards. So maybe it wasn't just me that bought into the hype of the band. Something else I think I regret buying into is the hype behind all these alternate albums that have come out over the last several years. I know Fleetwood Mac has done a few alternate albums. The Doors have also, a lot of bands have done them. There's a Stooges album that was announced that's coming out for October. But something I realized really quickly, because I've got a few of them in my collection, but something I realized really quickly is, they're kind of fun to sit down and listen to once or twice. But other than that, I'd rather listen to the original version of Rumors than the alternate version of it. There's a reason why that wasn't the chosen version of the album. And while it might be nice to go back and hear the construction of an album or the process the band went through to get to that end product, I think the end product is the end product because of the quality of it. And those other versions were left on the cutting room floor because they're just not as good. So instead of doing the alternate Rumors as a separate release, if you're going to release that, do that in conjunction with Rumors in, say, like an anniversary box set or something like that, where it's not just like a standalone release. Because honestly, I think really any of those alternate albums are really just a cash grab. Record Store Day is always kind of interesting because there's so many great albums that come out, but you never really know what's going to be great and what's not going to be great. I remember Record Store Day 2020 Skid Row reissued Slave to the Grind for the first time since, 1990 when it first came out. I remember standing in line, I was talking to a couple people around me, I had it on my maybe list. I decided because I was trying to stick within my budget, I ended up cutting it from my list and I didn't grab it for Record Store Day. And it was something I regretted for a couple of years until they released the Atlantic Years box set. So even though I missed out on the RSD version, I eventually got a version of it in that box set a year or so later. But there were some albums I picked up on Record Store Day that, looking back on, I probably listened maybe once, maybe twice, and never really listened to again. I know I grabbed the self-titled album from Buck Cherry, Record Store Day Black Friday in 2020. I think I grabbed it because I knew like a couple of songs off of it, and yeah, it was okay. I listened to it literally once or twice. In hindsight, I probably would have been better off just leaving it on the shelf that day. I still have it in my collection. I haven't sold it yet, but it's probably another album that, the next time I put a group of albums together to take to the record store, it'll probably be in that group. There's a Record Store Day release from last year, Planet Girls by Sponge, which I didn't think was going to be a great album. It was an unreleased album from 1999. Been a huge fan of Sponge's debut album, Rotting Pinata, since they first released it in 1994. And their sophomore album was really good also. It wasn't quite as good, but they really haven't released anything of note really since then. I remember when they released Lavatorium in 2021, I thought it was a terrible album, so I didn't have high expectations when they released Planet Girl for Record Store Day. It was another one of those RSD releases where, going into Record Store Day, I was hoping it was going to be better than what it was, but unfortunately it just ended up being another one of those wasted RSD releases. So I've been a huge fan of the Ramones for a very long time, so when they finally got around to reissuing End of the Century in 2018, I missed out on the reissue. And yeah, I can track down a copy of it online. It's not like super expensive, but it was still a reissue that I missed out on when it came out. And for literally years, even on Discogs, you couldn't find a copy of it. It's only been within the last couple of months that copies have started popping up online. But it's just kind of crazy to me to think that a band the size of the Ramones, an album like End of the Century, since 2011 has only been reissued once. But then again, it was one of those reissues that when it came out, I didn't hear anything about it. There was no announcement, at least no announcement I saw about it, which was a little strange because at that time it had been 7 years since it had been reissued. But I missed out on it, and it's still one I don't have in my collection. So every year I try to go through my record collection and pick out, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe like 50 or 60 albums and try to thin out the herd a little bit. Just try to make room for some new albums to come in. Try to get rid of some stuff that I know I'm not going to listen to or some duplicates that I've got in my collection. But surprisingly enough, of some of the regrets I have in my record collecting journey, I don't think any of them are ever from selling any records. I can't think of a single album that I've ever sold that I regret selling. And that's because whenever I do get down to selling albums, if there's ever any kind of question of whether or not I should keep it, I always err on the side of caution and end up keeping it in my collection. And then if it's still there the next year and I still have it in my sell pile, then I'll end up selling it. So it's one of those safeguards I have in place to make sure that I don't sell anything that I'm going to later on regret. Because that's the one thing I always see people talk about is, I've sold X, Y, and Z albums over the years, and I regretted selling those. I've never been able to track them down since. That's the one thing I just don't want to see happen. Because I did have that happen with a CD a very, very long time ago. At that time, I digitized my CD collection, and I didn't think I needed it in my collection anymore. I got rid of a bunch of my CDs. Then, unfortunately, the hard drive I had all my CDs on crashed, and I lost a bunch of them. And the CD was really hard to find, and I ended up spending a lot of money to track down that CD a lot of years later. So I guess that's the one regret I have. I guess that's probably one reason I treat the way I sell my records the way I do. But I've been lucky enough to say that a lot of the stuff I've missed out on over the years, I've been eventually able to track down, or stuff has been able to get reissued. So even though I've missed out on stuff the first time around, I have been able to eventually scoop them up. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think are some of the biggest regrets you guys have in your record collecting journey. Could be just about anything. Stuff you've sold that you regret, stuff you picked up that you regret, stuff you missed out on. Because for a lot of us that have been doing this for a long time, it's definitely a journey, and there's definitely bumps in the road along the way. So there's always regrets at some point in this journey. But let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button down below. And that's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.